Today, fans celebrate stars who don't win with speed or bounce. Players like Jokic, Luka, Sengun, superstars who slow the game down, who win with angles, timing, and basketball IQ, not raw athleticism. But decades before that archetype ever became popular, there was Larry Bird. Before the NBA, he went head-to-head with Magic Johnson on college basketball's biggest stage, the NCAA Finals. One became a can't-miss superstar. The other, college basketball's biggest enigma, still wasn't fully trusted. Despite that duel, despite everything he showed, he was picked 6th overall in the NBA draft. When he entered the league, nothing about him suggested dominance. He wasn't fast. He wasn't explosive. He didn't look like the future of the NBA. And yet, the people who actually had to guard him felt something very different. James Worthy once said he'd rather guard Michael Jordan than Larry Bird. Let that sink in.
I'd much rather guard Michael Jordan than Larry Bird because you have to play the game as a thinker when you're playing him.
And it wasn't just rivals saying it. Magic Johnson admitted that Larry Bird was the only player he truly feared in the NBA. This was the 1980s, a brutally stacked era with more than 50 future Hall of Famers sharing the floor. Legends like Julius Erving, Karl Malone, John Stockton, Charles Barkley, Dominique Wilkins, and Moses Malone. And yet, Larry Bird was the one who kept them up at night. And the moment Larry Bird arrived in Boston, everything changed. The Celtics had just won 29 games. As a rookie, Bird walked in and turned them into a 60-win team. Not after years of development, not with another superstar. Immediately. At the same time, that rivalry with Magic Johnson followed him into the NBA. East versus West, blue collar versus Showtime, skill versus flash. Together, they didn't just dominate the league, they saved it. Ratings were falling, interest was fading, and suddenly the NBA had a story again. Bird and Magic turned basketball back into an event, a rivalry, a reason to watch. No elite athletic gifts, no physical advantages, just skill, feel, and one of the greatest basketball minds the game has ever seen. Soon, he wasn't just beating defenders. He was telling them exactly what he was about to do, where he'd catch the ball, where he'd shoot from, how he'd end the game. And somehow, they still couldn't stop him. Even when his body began to betray him. Even when a devastating back injury took away what little athletic margin he had. He kept producing, kept winning, kept dragging his team across the finish line. Because for Larry Bird, there was no such thing as pacing yourself. No such thing as saving it for later. There was only winning, and no matter the cost. 3 straight MVPs, 3 championships, an entire era forced to adapt. He was never supposed to be this dominant. And this is the story of the original NBA superstar who proved that IQ, skill, and competitiveness could rule the league. This is Larry Bird. To understand how a skinny kid from a town most people couldn't find on a map ended up ruling the NBA, you have to go back. Back to French Lick, Indiana.
There will never, ever, ever be another Larry Bird.
Larry Bird didn't grow up dreaming about the NBA. He grew up learning how to endure. Born on December 7th, 1956 in West Baden Springs, Indiana, Larry Bird was raised just down the road in French Lick, a small working-class town and one of the poorest areas in the state. Larry was one of 6 kids, 4 brothers and a sister, growing up in a house where nothing came easy. His father, Joe Bird, was a veteran of World War II and the Korean War, a factory worker, a provider. His mother, Georgia, worked 2 jobs to keep the family afloat. Money was always tight. Sometimes it wasn't there at all. Larry has said that growing up poor still motivates him to this day. In French Lick, people didn't talk about dreams. They talked about getting through the week. Factory shifts, manual labor, paychecks stretched thin. You didn't complain. You didn't explain yourself. You worked. That environment shaped everything about Larry Bird, especially the way he carried himself. He wasn't loud. He wasn't expressive. He didn't chase attention. In French Lick, silence wasn't weakness. It was normal. Larry was close to his father. Joe did what he could to provide. But after returning from war, he struggled, quietly, with drinking, with things he never talked about. In that town, those struggles weren't discussed. They were endured. When Larry was still a teenager, his father took his own life. It hurt him deeply. But Larry didn't dramatize it. He accepted it. Plainly, matter-of-factly. The way people in French Lick accepted hard truths. As Larry would later say, his father chose his own way of life, and there was nothing he could do about it. That acceptance didn't mean it didn't matter. It meant Larry learned something early. Some things are out of your control, so the things he could control became everything. Larry was the fourth of 6 kids, and that meant nothing came easy. His older brothers, Mike and Mark, were excellent athletes, relentlessly competitive. Even though Larry was the little brother, they never took it easy on him. If Larry stepped up to the plate, they pitched harder to him than to anyone else. If he played poorly, they were the first ones to let him hear about it, to mock him, to test him, to see how badly he really wanted it. Larry didn't take kindly to it. The Bird brothers got into their share of fights, loud, ugly, competitive battles. But that pressure had an effect. It didn't break him. It made him determined to improve as fast as he possibly could, so he could finally beat them and earn their respect. Growing up, the Bird kids fought constantly. But the moment someone outside the family caused a problem, everything changed. They became a united front. Larry's father taught them that early. Joe Bird drilled one rule into his kids. You watch out for each other, no matter the circumstances. He told them if he ever heard they didn't stick up for one another, they shouldn't bother coming home. That lesson stayed with Larry. Not the fighting part, the responsibility part. The idea that if someone next to you is in trouble, you're already there. Larry would later say that upbringing prepared him to be a good teammate. He was always watching what was happening around him. If a teammate got trapped, Larry was there, immediately. And just as importantly, his teammates knew. He expected the same awareness from them. To Larry, that's how teams worked. You competed hard. You held each other accountable, but when it mattered, you protected your own. When there was no one around to play with, Larry played alone. Rubber balls, tennis balls, concrete walls, throwing, rebounding, repeating the same motions for hours at a time. That's where he learned something early. The more you do something, the better you get at it. Basketball became one of the few places where things made sense. Larry has said he used basketball as an escape from his family troubles. But it was more than escape. It was structure. A place where effort led somewhere. Where repetition showed results. So he did it more than anyone else. When he tried out for his high school team, he didn't make varsity. He made the B team. No shortcuts, no favors, just work. His coach believed in fundamentals, just drilling them into a young Larry Bird. Every dribble, every pivot, every rebound using both hands. When Larry was told to use his left hand, he didn't dabble with it. He dribbled full court with it, every day. Then came the setback. A broken ankle during his sophomore year, nearly an entire season lost. Most players would have shut it down. Larry didn't. He shot free throws on crutches, worked on passing while hobbling around in a cast. And that's when something clicked. Larry discovered he loved passing. Not because it was flashy, but because it gave order to the chaos. When he finally returned, his game had changed, and all that work finally showed up. By his senior season at Springs Valley High School, Larry Bird was averaging 30.1 points, 20.6 rebounds, and 4.6 assists. In his final high school game, he put up 54 points, 38 rebounds, and 8 assists. In an era with no spacing and no three-point line, critics brushed it aside, saying the Valley wasn't a real proving ground, that Larry hadn't played anyone who mattered. Bird wasn't fazed. Soon came his first real moment. A packed gym, a tournament game. Larry sitting on the bench. Then he heard his name. First touch. He pulls up from deep. Swish. Late in the game, with everything on the line, he stepped to the free throw line and imagined it was 6 a.m. Alone in the gym back home. Routine. Both shots fell. They won. The next day's headline read, "Bird steals the show." That was the moment Larry decided. Basketball wasn't just something he played. It was everything. Larry had been taught early that real work meant more than effort. His father used to say that if you worked on something big, something that took time, you should see it from the beginning and stay with it until the very end. Only then would you have something you could truly be proud of. That idea stayed with Larry. It's why he was never satisfied with flashes, never satisfied with stretches, never satisfied with almost. Larry wanted to see the entire thing through, from the first workout to the final possession. As he would later say, maybe that's why I'm never satisfied until I've put together a whole season of winning games, until the Celtics won a championship. Then, I've seen the season through from beginning to end in a way that I can be proud of. By the time Larry Bird left French Lick, he wasn't chasing fame, he wasn't chasing attention, he was chasing certainty. And eventually, that kind of work gets noticed. The best college program in the state came calling. Indiana University. Recruited by one of the toughest coaches in the country, Bobby Knight. For the first time, Larry Bird had everything he was supposed to want. And it didn't last. Leaving French Lick was supposed to be the easy part. Larry Bird had done the work, put in the hours, earned the respect. Now, the basketball world was finally opening its doors. Indiana University came calling. A powerhouse program, national attention, and one of the toughest coaches in the country. Bobby Knight wanted him. For a kid from French Lick, this was everything you were supposed to want. But from the moment Larry arrived on campus, something felt wrong. The campus was massive. The classes were crowded. The expectations were constant. Larry Bird wasn't overwhelmed by the basketball. He was overwhelmed by everything else. The noise, the structure, the feeling of being just another body in a system. And there was something no one really talks about. He didn't have enough money. For the first time in his life, he was out of his bubble. Basketball didn't feel like control. It felt like pressure. Larry lasted just 24 days at Indiana. No announcement, no drama. He packed up, left campus, hitchhiked home, to French Lick, to work, to quiet. For a while, it looked like the story might end there. Larry enrolled at a nearby junior college, worked municipal jobs, collected trash, paved roads. Basketball faded into the background, not because he didn't love it, but because he needed his footing back. That's when someone reached out. Bill Hodges, the head coach at Indiana State University, had been watching quietly. Hodges didn't promise fame, he didn't sell stardom. He offered Larry something else. A smaller campus, a simpler environment, a team that would let him play his game, and most importantly, a chance to fall in love with basketball again. Larry listened, not because Indiana State was glamorous, but because it felt right. No spotlight, no pressure, just a gym, a ball, and time. When Larry Bird arrived at Indiana State University, he didn't come alone. He brought French Lick with him, his brother, Eddie, old high school teammates, guys who'd been running with him for years. They didn't look like recruits. Jeans, t-shirts, street sneakers. Indiana State wasn't a powerhouse. No tournament history, no national relevance, just another mid-tier program. Coach Bill Hodges invited Bird to scrimmage the varsity team, offered him real basketball gear. Larry shook his head. "No, I play better in this." Eddie backed him up, said it like a fact. And then the ball went up. What followed wasn't a scrimmage. It was a lesson. Larry Bird, in blue jeans, took over the gym. He scored, he passed, he rebounded, he talked the entire time. His group of hometown friends ran the varsity off the floor. Crisp passes, effort plays, shot after shot falling. By the end, the number was impossible to ignore. 43 points in jeans. Hodges knew immediately. This wasn't development. This was discovery. At Indiana State, Larry Bird found himself again. Over 3 seasons, he didn't just rebuild his career. He rewrote the school's history. The Sycamores had never reached the NCAA tournament. With Bird, they went 33-0 and reached the tournament for the first time ever. They didn't just win, they dominated. By his senior year, Indiana State was undefeated and headed to the national championship game. Waiting on the other side was Magic Johnson and Michigan State. Different styles, different personalities, but for the first time, the entire country was watching both of them at once. The game became the most watched college basketball game in history. Bird scored 19 points, but struggled from the field. Indiana State lost, 75-64. They didn't win the title, but Larry Bird left no doubt. He finished his college career averaging 30 points, 13 rebounds, and nearly 5 assists per game. Indiana State went 81-13 during his time there, and when the season ended, Bird was named the Naismith College Player of the Year. He didn't leave Indiana State as a curiosity. He left as the best player in college basketball. The same kid who walked away from Indiana quietly had taken the longest road possible, and arrived exactly where he belonged. Larry Bird didn't leave college with a championship ring. He left with something harder to ignore. Proof. Proof that dominance didn't need speed. That control could win anywhere, that the game bent toward him. The NBA noticed. And in Boston, a franchise that had just fallen apart was about to bet everything on a player who didn't look like a savior. Larry Bird didn't enter the NBA quietly. In 1978, the Boston Celtics selected him with the 6th overall pick in the draft. And then, they waited. Bird chose to return to Indiana State for one final season to finish what he started. For nearly a year, Boston held his rights without knowing if he'd ever sign. Behind the scenes, the tension was real. Celtics president and general manager Red Auerbach made one thing clear. Bird wouldn't be paid more than anyone already on the roster. Bird's camp didn't budge. If Boston lowballed him, Larry would walk, re-enter the draft, and the Celtics would lose him for nothing. For a franchise drifting further from relevance, that wasn't a risk they could afford. So Boston made its decision. On June 8, 1979, they signed Larry Bird to a 5-year deal that made him the highest-paid rookie in professional sports history. The contract was so unprecedented, the league rewrote its rules afterward. Before Bird ever played an NBA game, he had already forced the system to adjust. But the real impact came fast. The Celtics were coming off a 29-win season. They were aging, disconnected, and far removed from their championship identity. Larry Bird walked into that locker room, and nothing felt the same. The ball moved differently. Cuts were sharper. Mistakes weren't ignored. Bird didn't lead with speeches, he led with expectations. From the opening weeks of his rookie season, it was obvious this wasn't a slow build. Boston stopped losing. By the end of the year, the Celtics had won 61 games, a 32-win improvement. They finished first in the Eastern Conference. No dramatic roster overhaul, no superstar additions, just Larry Bird. As a rookie, he averaged over 21 points, 10 rebounds, and 4 assists a night. Within weeks, triple-doubles appeared. 30-point nights followed, not as explosions as routine. Bird didn't look like the fastest player on the floor. He didn't overwhelm anyone physically, but he dictated pace. He punished mistakes, he made teammates better. By season's end, Larry Bird was an all-star. He was named Rookie of the Year, and the Celtics were suddenly a title contender again. What was supposed to be a gradual rebuild became an immediate resurrection. In just his second season, Larry Bird led the Celtics to their first championship of the 1980s, dismantling the Malone-led Houston Rockets in 6 games, and it was only the beginning. Larry Bird didn't arrive as a project, he arrived as a solution, and the league understood something very quickly. This wasn't a fluke. This wasn't momentum. This was what happened when control replaced chaos. Larry Bird didn't change Boston by jumping higher or running faster. He changed them by seeing things before they happened. What came next wasn't about athleticism. It was about control. Larry Bird didn't dominate the NBA by doing things no one else could do. He dominated by doing things no one else saw coming. He wasn't the fastest player on the floor. He didn't jump the highest. He didn't overwhelm defenders with strength or speed. What he had was control. Bird understood something most players never fully grasp. Basketball isn't about who moves the fastest. It's about who moves first. He saw passing lanes before they opened. He read defenders before they committed. He knew where help was coming from and punished it before it arrived. While others reacted, Bird dictated. He played the game one step ahead, slowing it down until everyone else was uncomfortable. Angles mattered more than explosiveness. Timing mattered more than power. A single pivot could create space. A look-off could collapse a defense. A pass delivered a half-second earlier could break a possession completely. Bird didn't need to beat you off the dribble. He made you guard everything at once. That's why defenders felt helpless. They weren't losing because they were slower. They were losing because they were late. Bird also understood efficiency long before it became fashionable. He didn't take shots to get hot. He took shots to end games. Every look had a purpose. Every decision applied pressure. And when the moment mattered most, he wanted the ball. Not to force something, but to finish what he'd already set up. This is why his trash talk worked. When Bird told you what he was about to do, it wasn't bravado, it was information. Because the work had already been done. The repetitions had already stacked. The outcome was already familiar. Athleticism fades. Timing doesn't. Speed declines. Skill compounds. Bird built a game that aged gracefully even while he was still in his prime. He didn't play above the rim. He played above the moment. And that's why his dominance felt different. It wasn't loud, it wasn't explosive, it was inevitable. Larry Bird's dominance wasn't just physical or tactical, it was mental. Because once he understood the game better than you, he didn't need to surprise you, he could warn you. Larry Bird didn't trash talk to intimidate, he trash talked to inform. Most players talk because they're emotional, because they're hyped, because they're reacting. Bird talked because he already knew the outcome. When Larry Bird told a defender what he was about to do, it wasn't a bluff, it was a schedule. He'd tell you where he was catching the ball, where he was shooting from, how the play was ending, and then he'd do exactly that. Not because you didn't hear him, but because there was nothing you could do about it.
He said, I'm gonna get it right here, I'm gonna shoot it right in your face.
10 seconds. 5, and Bird has the basketball. Look out. Larry Bird just phenomenal the way that...
And you know, he was like, I didn't mean to leave 2 seconds on the clock. He wanted to shoot it with 0 seconds on the clock.
This is what made it different. Bird wasn't faster than you. He wasn't stronger than you. He wasn't jumping over you. He had already beaten you before the ball was even inbounded. The trash talk wasn't the weapon. Preparation was. Every word was backed by thousands of repetitions, by shots taken alone in empty gyms, by scenarios he had already lived through in his head. So when Bird spoke, it wasn't confidence, it was certainty. Defenders tried everything. They crowded him, they baited him, they dared him to do something else. Bird didn't adjust, he executed. Sometimes he'd call the shot early, just to remove doubt. Sometimes he'd wait until the moment mattered most, when there was nowhere to hide. That's why opponents remember it decades later, not because it was loud, but because it was humiliating. You weren't just beaten, you were warned. This wasn't ego. It was control taken to its extreme. Bird understood something few players ever have. If you already know the ending, the defense is just going through the motions. Trash talk didn't distract Bird. It focused him, it locked him into the moment, forced him to be precise, forced him to deliver. And when he did, it reinforced the legend, not the myth of arrogance, but the reality of mastery. Because when Larry Bird said, "I'm shooting it from here," he wasn't talking. He was telling the truth. Larry Bird's trash talk ended games. But what came next ended something bigger. Because the moment Bird arrived in the NBA, he wasn't alone. Waiting on the other side of the league was the one player whose story was forever tied to his, Magic Johnson. And together they didn't just define an era, they saved a league. By the time Larry Bird established himself in Boston, the NBA was in trouble. Attendance was slipping. Ratings were falling. Games were being aired on tape delay. The league didn't have a story people cared about. Then, almost overnight, it had two. Larry Bird in Boston, Magic Johnson in Los Angeles. They weren't just great players. They were opposites. Bird represented cold gyms, hard work, and precision. Magic represented flash, joy, and movement. East versus West. Blue collar versus showtime. Discipline versus spectacle. And the contrast mattered. Because fans didn't just pick teams, they picked sides. The rivalry exploded so quickly that the league did something almost unthinkable. The NBA scheduled 4 preseason games between Boston and Los Angeles. Cross-country rivals. Before the season even started. Something you would never see in today's NBA. That's how badly the league needed this matchup. And how powerful it already was. When Boston played Los Angeles, it wasn't just a game. It was identity versus identity. Bird's Celtics didn't try to entertain. They tried to break you down. They moved the ball. They punished mistakes. They took pride in doing things the hard way. Magic's Lakers were the opposite. Fast breaks. No-look passes. A celebration every possession. Together, they gave the league something it desperately needed. Meaning. Every matchup felt like it stood for something bigger than basketball. The rivalry reignited interest in the NBA. Ratings climbed, national attention returned. Basketball became appointment viewing again. And at the center of it all was Larry Bird. Not as a showman, not as a salesman, but as proof that dominance didn't have to look exciting to matter. Bird didn't sell the league with charisma. He sold it with inevitability. With execution so precise that fans leaned forward just to understand how it happened. Magic made you smile. Bird made you stare. And that balance saved the league, because together they showed that the NBA could be many things at once, fast and slow, flashy and ruthless, joyful and unforgiving. This wasn't a rivalry built on friendship, it was built on contrast, on mutual elevation, and on the understanding that Neither one works without the other. The NBA didn't just survive the early 1980s, it evolved. And when the league finally found its footing again, it was standing on a foundation built by two players who couldn't have been more different, yet couldn't have existed without each other. Larry Bird didn't just win championships, he helped give the NBA its future. Larry Bird helped save the NBA. He helped restore its relevance, its identity, its future. But greatness like that doesn't come without a price, and Larry Bird paid it with his body. Larry Bird never learned how to win halfway. From the beginning, effort wasn't a choice. It was a responsibility. If you were on the floor, you were expected to give everything you had and then some. Larry didn't believe in pacing yourself. He didn't believe in saving it for later. And he didn't believe in sitting out if he felt he could still help his team win. That mindset built champions. It also came with a cost. Bird played hurt the same way he played the game, quietly without complaint. And the injuries didn't wait until the end of his career. Before he ever played a single NBA game, Larry Bird was already compromised. The summer before his rookie season, he was playing a casual game of softball with his brother, Mike. One knuckleball caught Larry's right index finger. At first, they laughed. Then Larry threw the ball again. The throw sailed wildly, nothing like it should have. He looked down and saw his finger bent at nearly a 90-degree angle. Broken.
Like a Tim Wakefield knuckleball, it's just spinning all over the place. And Larry tries to go down and make a basket catch, and his finger goes all the way back, and he's like, man, wow, it really hurts. And he looked down, and his finger was completely dislocated and mangled. And
most shooters would panic. Larry adjusted. He changed his grip, altered his release, learned how to live with it. And then, he became one of the greatest shooters the game has ever seen. After entering the league, Bird's shooting translated seamlessly. He joined the 50-40-90 club, not once, but twice. He won 3 three-point contests, often treating them like formalities. All of it achieved with a finger that never fully healed the way it should have. And still, Bird never used it as an excuse. That mindset showed itself again in years later. In 1985, after a rough shooting night, 4 for 15, Bird had bruised that same finger, causing visible swelling. When asked about it afterward, he brushed it aside. "I have to play as well as I can," he said. "If I put on a uniform, I don't like to think of it at all. It hurts, but it's just another thing you have to accept. I can accept it. I've been able to overcome pain." This wasn't bravado. It was how he lived. As the years went on, the injuries became heavier. Back spasms, nerve pain, a body that never fully felt right. And then came the injury that defined the cost. Not in an arena, but in his driveway. Bird hurt his back doing manual labor, paving a driveway for his mother. Not because he had to, because that's how he was wired. The injury changed everything. It robbed him of what little athletic margin he had left, turned every game into a negotiation with pain. And still, Larry Bird kept playing because he believed something deeply, something that separates his era from today's.
If you get paid to go to work, you got to go to work.
Bird believed showing up mattered. People paid their money. They rearranged their schedules. They came to see him play. And he refused to let them down. When asked why he didn't stay home with injuries, Bird put it simply: "If I had a regular job as a construction worker, I wouldn't stay home with an injury like this, so I'm not staying home from this job." Today, players talk about load management, about preserving their bodies, about the long game, and that thinking makes sense. But Bird came from a time when availability was part of greatness, where sitting out didn't feel strategic, it felt wrong. Even late in his career, with a debilitating back injury, Bird was still producing elite scoring numbers in a more physical era, with hand-checking, with defenders allowed to punish mistakes. He wasn't surviving on athleticism, he was surviving on skill, on timing, on will. The same pride that made him great made it impossible for him to stop. Rest felt like letting people down. Sitting out felt like quitting. So he played, not because it was smart, because it was who he was. Larry Bird wasn't chasing longevity. He was chasing wins. And he understood the deal. Winning demanded something, and he was willing to pay the price. Larry Bird paid the price for greatness. He played through pain. He gave everything the game asked of him. And for a brief stretch, the league gave him something back. The peak. Larry Bird didn't measure greatness the way most players do. By the mid-1980s, he had reached the top of the league, not by becoming more athletic, but by becoming impossible to rush. For 3 straight seasons, 1984, 1985, and 1986, Larry Bird was voted the most valuable player. 3 in a row. Not because of hype, not because of narrative, because everyone watching understood the same thing. He controlled the game better than anyone alive. Bird dictated pace. He decided when possessions slowed, when they accelerated, when they ended. He scored without forcing, passed without hesitation, rebounded without chasing. Nothing was wasted. At his peak, Bird wasn't reacting to defenses. He was setting traps. He punished help defenders, exposed mismatches, turned small mistakes into immediate damage. And he did it with ruthless efficiency. 50% from the field, 40% from 3, 90% from the line. Perfection, without flash. The originator of the 50-40-90 club before it was coined. But if you ask Larry Bird, the MVPs weren't the point. He said it himself. After you win one, it doesn't really mean much to win another. Because an MVP is individual. It's just you. A championship is different. That belongs to the team, to the city, to every fan who lived and died with each possession. That's what mattered to Bird, which is why the 1985 season, arguably the best statistical year of his career, felt hollow. That year, Bird averaged nearly 29 points, 10 rebounds, and 7 assists. He won MVP again. But Boston didn't win the title. They lost to the Lakers in 6 games. And for Bird, that made all the difference. The award didn't feel like a celebration, because there was nothing to celebrate together. That season also carried a reminder that Bird never pretended to be flawless. During the Eastern Conference Finals, he got into a bar fight. His play dipped afterward, and instead of deflecting blame, Bird owned it. He admitted the mistake. He admitted he was human. That honesty mattered because it reflected how he viewed leadership, not as perfection, but as responsibility. And when everything aligned, in 1984 and again in 1986, Bird got what he truly cared about. Championships, finals MVPs, moments shared with teammates. With the city of Boston, the Celtics came painfully close to something historic. 3 straight championships, 3 straight MVPs, 3 straight finals MVPs. They didn't quite get there. But the fact that they were even that close tells you everything about the level Bird was operating on. For 3 years, there was no debate. Larry Bird, he wasn't just the best player in basketball. He was the standard. And even at the peak, even while collecting the game's highest honors, he never lost sight of what mattered most. Not the trophies on his shelf, but the people he won them with. Larry Bird reached the summit. 3 straight MVPs, 3 championships, a peak few players ever touch. But his real impact didn't end there, because long after the trophies stopped coming, the blueprint he created never left. Larry Bird didn't invent skill. He proved it could rule, long before spacing charts, before efficiency models, before the league learned to value feel as much as force. Bird showed that basketball intelligence could dominate at the highest level, and in many ways, he was ahead of his time. On paper, Larry Bird was listed at 6 feet 9 inches. In reality, he was closer to 6'11".
You don't realize how big Larry Bird is until you stand close to Larry Bird.
Exactly. That's a man.
Larry Bird legit 6'10".
Real talk.
In today's NBA, that size changes everything. A near 7-footer who could shoot, pass, rebound, and control an offense from anywhere on the floor. Back then, that didn't fit the mold. Forwards were expected to post up. Big men stayed inside. Playmaking belonged to guards. Bird broke all of it. He handled the ball like a wing, passed like a point guard, shot like a specialist, and that included the 3-point line. When Bird entered the league, the 3-pointer was still an experiment. It had only been introduced in 1979, his rookie season. Teams didn't build offenses around it. Coaches treated it like a gimmick. The priority was still the same. Get the ball inside, draw fouls, take good shots. Even the league's best shooters didn't see the 3 as essential. Bird never averaged more than 3.5 3-point attempts per game in his entire career. Not because he couldn't shoot them, but because the game didn't ask him to. In fact, from 1980 to 1984, he barely attempted even 1 3 per game. And yet, defenders knew better than to leave him open. Bird understood something early. The value of the shot wasn't volume, it was pressure. One of the few people pushing that idea back then was his teammate Danny Ainge. Ainge talked about using the three at a time when most of the league dismissed it. The math made sense, even if the mindset hadn't caught up yet. Bird listened, not because he wanted to take more threes, but because he understood efficiency. If you made them, they changed the geometry of the floor. So Bird made the ones he took count. When the league slowly began to accept the shot, Bird adapted immediately. He didn't chase volume, he chased leverage. In 1986, he won the NBA's first ever three-point contest. Then he won it again. And again. Before one of those contests, Bird walked into the locker room, looked around at the field, and asked, "Who's coming in second?" It wasn't arrogance, it was familiarity.
You at the three-point competition, walking in the locker room, who's playing? Did you really say that? Who's playing for second?
Yeah, I did. I felt so bad because I didn't realize there's so much tension on it. I'm out there every day in front of these fans.
Bird understood that shooting in an empty gym was easy. Doing it with 20,000 people watching, that was different. And he thrived in that difference. Over his career, Bird shot over 40% from 3 and 6 different seasons. Even in his final year, with a back so damaged he could barely sit on the bench, he still shot over 40%. Because his game wasn't built on lift. It was built on touch, on balance, on repetition. The era naturally suppressed his three-point numbers. The league didn't want long shots, it wanted post-play, mid-range jumpers, physicality, so Bird adjusted to the game he was given, and still became one of the most feared shooters alive. That's why his legacy matters, not because of what he did, but because of what he could have done if the game had caught up sooner. Today, stars take 10 or more threes a night. Offenses are built around spacing and efficiency. That world didn't exist yet. Larry Bird was already living in it. He didn't ask the game to change for him. He mastered it as it was. And in doing so, he quietly changed what greatness could look like. Not louder, not faster, but smarter. Larry Bird was never supposed to look like this. He wasn't fast enough. He didn't jump high enough. He didn't fit the mold. He came from a town most people couldn't find on a map. From a background that didn't produce superstars. From an era that valued power and physicality over feel and finesse. And yet, he dominated. Today, some modern analytics conversations try to flatten Larry Bird's greatness. They point to raw three-point totals, volume, era-agnostic spreadsheets, and miss the point entirely. That isn't a reflection of how good a shooter Larry Bird was. It's a reflection of how little the three-point shot was valued in his time. When Bird played, the three wasn't a weapon, it was an afterthought. Coaches didn't build offenses around it. Players didn't grow up training it. The league didn't reward volume, and still, defenders knew better than to leave him open. Bird didn't shoot fewer threes because he couldn't. He shot fewer threes because the game didn't ask him to. But when the game did ask, when the moment demanded it, Larry Bird fired away. Late game. Score tight. Season on the line. If Boston needed a three, Bird didn't hesitate. He took it, and more often than not, he made it. That same truth showed up on the biggest shooting stage the league had. In his third straight three-point contest, Bird wasn't cruising. He was in danger of losing. And with everything on the line, he hit 3 straight on the final rack to win it again. Third contest. Third straight title, not bad, for someone people claim wasn't a great three-point shooter. Because Bird was never about volume. He was about timing. When the lights were brightest, his game got sharper, just like every true legend. But Larry Bird's dominance came with a cost. His peak was short, not because he lacked discipline, but because he had too much of it. He played hard every single game, every single practice. He didn't know how to dial it back. He played in one of the most physically demanding eras the NBA has ever seen. A decade where giants lived in the paint, where hard fouls were considered regular fouls, where hand-checking was normal, where spacing wasn't even a concept yet. And Bird embraced all of it. He played through injuries, even in the regular season, because he knew people were watching. Fans rearranged their lives, spent their money, brought their kids, and Bird refused to let them down. From his rookie season to his last championship in 1986, he missed only 10 regular season games. 10. He didn't take nights off. He didn't coast. Even practice mattered. Teammates said Bird practiced like the game was already on the line. Same intensity, same focus, same expectations, because to him, there was no such thing as a meaningless possession. So when modern debates reduce him to totals and charts, they miss what made Larry Bird inevitable. And that leads to a simple question. Game on the line. Season hanging in the balance. You need a 3. Who are you taking? Someone who happens to have more career 3s? Or Larry Bird himself? Everyone knows the answer. Because Larry Bird didn't dominate by accident. He didn't dominate because the era helped him. He dominated because he understood the game before the game understood itself. And that's why, decades later, his legacy doesn't feel old, it feels current. Because every time a player slows the game down, every time skill beats speed, every time intelligence wins over athleticism, you're seeing the echo. Larry Bird was never supposed to be this dominant, he just was. Larry Bird proved that skill, IQ, and competitiveness could rule the NBA. He helped save the league. He defined an era. But the NBA never stands still. As Bird's body began to break down, another force was already waiting. A player who would take the league Bird helped rebuild and push it into an entirely new dimension. A player whose career took a turn no one saw coming. And when he came back, basketball was never the same. The day he quit baseball and changed basketball forever, Michael Jordan.